guys, welcome back to another video. So today's video is not going to be a show and tell. It's actually going to be a big, juicy, long ramble about another film. So today I'm going to be talking about the 2002 film Unfaithful, directed by Adrian Lyne. So this film is basically a gender-swapped Fatal Attraction, and I can say that with confidence, not just because of the themes, but also because the director also did Fatal Attraction, and a whole bunch of other films that kind of fall into a kind of steamy romance thriller genre, including Indecent Proposal, actually, which I didn't realise was also his film. That's also a good film. Maybe at some point I'll rewatch it and talk about that one as well. But yeah, he's done quite a lot of films. I'd like to watch some of the other ones at some point, but today I'm going to talk about Unfaithful. I'm going to compare it a little bit to Fatal Attraction because if you've seen my other video where I talked about the trilogy of Michael Douglas films, you will know that I'm already quite familiar with that film. So I can draw a few comparisons and just talk about how I think there are some sort of double standards in relation to male infidelity versus female infidelity. But yeah, I will get into that as we get further into this video. So to start with, I'm just going to outline the basic premise of the film. So as the title suggests, this is another film that revolves around a character having an affair, and as you've guessed it with me saying it's gender swapped, this time it is the wife who is unfaithful and not the husband. So this film, it came out in 2002, but it has some very like 90s energy, like late 90s energy to it. I'm not really sure why that is. Maybe it was made a little while before it was released, I don't know. But yeah, it stars Diane Lane as the wife, Connie Sumner. So it's not Summer with two M's, it's Sumner. So Sumner. But I'm not really going to refer to their surnames much, but I'm just including that. So Diane Lane plays Connie, the wife. Richard Gere plays the husband, Ed, or short for Edward, who is just an absolute hunk of a man. I love Richard Gere. I try not to get too distracted talking about Richard Gere just being, you know, a legend, a handsome legend. And then their son Charlie, who I think is meant to be about 8 or 9, is played by Eric Sullivan. I think it's Per and not Pear. Who, anyone who is a 90s kid, he's played like children in like a few films. I think he's only ever really been a child actor. I'm not sure. I think that there was some kind of stuff going on with his personal life. But you will recognise him probably if you've ever seen Malcolm in the Middle. He plays Dewey in Malcolm in the Middle, or should I say Dewey, the youngest child in that film. And he's been in a few other things as well. I think I have seen him, other than in this Unfaithful film, I think I've maybe seen him in 1 or 2 other things. So I think he was a reasonably prolific child actor. But yeah, so the basic premise of the film is sort of Connie having an affair and the fallout of that affair. I don't want to give too much away at this point, so I'll kind of deal with the second half of the film as we get further into the video. So we open with Connie and her family, and it's a pretty normal domestic scene. Her husband is, I think he's getting ready for work, and he's talking about how he regrets that he hasn't invested in like a particular stock that has gone up a lot in value. And the son is also, like, Connie's trying to get her son ready for school. Some of the dialogue in the opening scene is a little bit clunky. For some reason they have, I think that the son, Charlie, in this film is pretty good, and they kind of manage a fairly realistic depiction of him as a child that doesn't feel too hammy or overdone. But I will say that the opening scene is a bit weird. Like, he's constantly calling his mother like bonkers and like sort of like, I don't know, just making out like she's kind of weird or inept. And I don't know, I feel like the writing doesn't really work very well in this scene. But yeah, I think similarly to Fatal Attraction, you kind of immediately get the sense that Connie is a little bit you know, bored of domesticity. Like, she's not unhappy in her marriage or like with her family by any means, but I think in a similar way to Fatal Attraction, you kind of get, you know, you're shown all the very like mundane elements of like domestic married family life, just to kind of sort of set up this idea that you know, Connie is maybe looking for something a little bit exciting in her life, to kind of lead towards the affair. So yeah, everybody gets ready and goes out. Also, just to paint a little bit of a visual picture as well for anybody who isn't really familiar with these actors. So Richard Gere, he's a very handsome man, as I've mentioned. They kind of play him as a very kind of sort of like nerdy, wholesome looking husband in this film. So he's got kind of like rimmed glasses, and he wears like jumpers and sweaters and stuff. I think he's already got the grey hair and everything. Like, he's very good looking, but it's very, you know, he kind of just looks like a very settled sort of husband. And then you have Connie, played by Diane Lane. I've not seen Diane Lane in anything else, but she's very beautiful, obviously, and she's been in a lot of films, it looks like, so it would be nice to see her in some other stuff. She, again, I think the part of the reason why I say this film has big 90s energy is because Diane Lane looks very, a lot of the styling of this film, like the fashion, everything feels very 90s. So Diane Lane, a lot of the time she's walking around in like a trench coat, and she's got her hair like, a lot of the time it's kind of, sometimes it's down, but sometimes it's up, but in like a very kind of messy, like sexily undone way. And she's got like, you know, like a few strands of hair like around her face, and like it's a little bit, I don't know, it's very like rolled out of bed, kind of like casually undone, kind of sexy, which I really think of as a very 90s look in particular. I think because the 80s was very like, everything was very big, wasn't it? Like, you had big hair and everything was very overdone. And then the 90s, I think a lot of the kind of films and the fashion that I've seen was a lot more kind of casual for the women. Not that they weren't wearing makeup, but everything looked very understated in comparison. And I think a lot of Diane Lane's fashion in this film, like the trench coats and the kind of like, she wears a lot of like very like plain but elegant, like like black or white, sometimes blue, I think, dresses that are very like simple, flattering cuts on her body. And like, yeah, I think just the whole look of it on, she has like all the heels, and it all feels very 90s, which, yeah, that's just to paint a bit of a picture for you. But anyway, so Connie heads out for the day, and it's a very, very windy day. I forget whereabouts they live. So Soho is where she meets Paul Martel, who will be the man that she has the affair with, who's played by Olivier Martinez. Again, an actor that I haven't seen in anything else, but I'm sure that he's been in other things, obviously. So he... he lives in Soho. I don't know where exactly Connie and Ed and Charlie live. They have a really beautiful house that's like a little bit outside of the city, and you do find out fairly early on in the film that they have moved out of, like, I don't know whether it's Soho specifically or just like the city in general, because Connie thinks it will be better for Charlie. Like, I think she wants him to sort of have maybe like a more settled life and, you know, live in like a bit more of a suburb. And you do get, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself here, so I'm going to have to loop back. But there is the moments where that's referenced, like Paul references the suburbs, and there's a lot of emphasis on her being this suburban wife and how it maybe doesn't fully suit her as like a character. And she's quite glamorous and not great at like, not as interested in perhaps like traditional domesticity and stuff. But again, I'll get back into that later. So I'm not sure where Charlie and Ed and Connie live. It's somewhere outside of New York, I think. Maybe Boston? I don't know. It's a really beautiful house, but it's not particularly relevant, so I'm just going to carry on. So Connie is in the city. I think she's just doing like her errands for the day or something. I can't remember if they actually explain why she's in the city. But yeah, it's a very, very windy day, and she takes a fall, and she's wearing this like trench coat and like some kind of dress and heels. So she's got bare legs, and she like really like cuts up her knee. And it's this point that she meets Paul Martel. Paul, to give you an idea of his appearance, is a very kind of, I don't know, I guess what you'd expect, like a stereotypically attractive like French man. Um, I mean he's very attractive. I don't know. I feel like this isn't the point of the film, obviously, but I feel like if I had to choose, I would rather have Richard Gere personally. Not that that's really the point, but he is also revealed to be a bit younger than Connie at the start as well. So when she meets him, he invites her up to his apartment. He's like holding some books and stuff, and you find out that he's a bookseller. And he invites her up to his apartment to like patch up her knee. And, you know, I think one of the first questions she asks him is like, how old are you? Like, I think Connie's about, I'd place her like 40 or maybe very early 40s, because Charlie is about 8 or 9. And you know, I'm guessing that they had their child when they were like, you know, 30-ish. So, and I mean, it's not helped by the fact that I think Diane Lane looks younger than she possibly is. But I would guess her to be 40 or very early 40s, definitely not older than that. But she's like a decade older than this guy who says that he's 28. So, you know, there's also that. I don't think they really like play into it a ton in this film anyway, but there is this obviously older woman, younger man thing as well. And, you know, it is sort of, again, it's referenced a little bit by the fact that, so at this point where Connie meets Paul and goes up to his apartment and he patches up her knee, like nothing particularly happens between them, like it's all quite chaste. And, you know, she finds out more about him being a bookseller, and then, you know, she just leaves and goes home. And, you know, she's very, like, there's obviously a spark between them. And he insists also before she leaves that she takes a book with her as well, like to keep. I think he even points one out on the shelf or something. So she takes this book home with her. And, you know, when she gets home, she tells her husband that she took a fall. And she says, like an old lady, which I think is like a really interesting, like, I think there's a lot of, maybe not a ton, but there's a kind of a lot of emphasis on where Connie's at in her marital life now, that she's sort of maybe, and not that I don't think Ed ever makes her feel that way as well, which is nice. Like, it's not really implied to be that she's having this affair because she feels undesired by Ed, because there are, I'll get into it a bit later, but there are scenes in the film where, you know, he tries to initiate sex with her, and he makes her feel very, you know, he calls her beautiful, and he's very like, he's very loving and attentive husband, which I guess is also partly why it's quite sad that, you know, she has this affair. And again, I think similar to Fatal Attraction, it's not that her marriage is lacking specifically. I think it's just that sort of like she hits like a moment of boredom and kind of succumbs to temptation. But yeah, I think it's interesting that she says like an old lady, because it's sort of a bit of like how she's sort of looking at herself, and she kind of wants to feel, not that her husband doesn't love her and desire her, but I think that she's looking to kind of maybe have it validated in a more extreme way, and that's why she chooses to begin the affair. Maybe not the only reason, but I think that, you know, it's still a little bit telling of like that she sort of feels a bit like a bit more fuddy-duddy than she would like to feel. And again, you don't know if part of that is because she has moved to the suburbs. I should also say that, like, I feel like they very deliberately chose to have Paul Martel be this kind of sexy French guy, and to lean into like a bit of this kind of sexy foreigner kind of trope of like this virile, you know, European man. Like, I think you see that a lot in media, like usually kind of, I'd say French, Italian or Spanish, like that these men are very virile, very sexual, very high sex drives, very good in bed. And I think they're also leaning towards that. As, you know, again, a reason why Connie has sort of succumbed to this guy in a way that I think, like, I get the impression that if she just met, like, you know, a random New Yorker on the street, you know, even if he'd been handsome, I just don't really feel like it would have happened. So I think that's also part of, like, this, like, enticement for her. Yeah, and Paul, again, just to give you a bit more of a visual on Paul, because I feel like I've not done that, he's sort of got this like sweeping brown hair, and he kind of walks around in like leather jackets and stuff, so it's kind of like a very simple kind of masculinity that they're going for. But yeah, like they're really kind of leaning into the virility with that idea. So yeah, Connie goes home, nothing happens, and I think around this time we have the first scene where her husband is trying to sort of initiate sex with her, and this time around, like, she is actually receptive to it. So they're in the bedroom and he's messing around with like a new like camcorder that he's got, and he's trying to film her a lot because, you know, he finds her very attractive and stuff, and she's just wearing this like loose nighty thing. And they start like kissing and stuff, and you know, I think that it's very much going to turn into like a sexual encounter. I don't know if encounter is really the right word when they've been married for like over a decade. But then they're interrupted by their child, Charlie, their son, who, like, I can't remember if he's had a bad dream or something, but he just wants to sleep with them, or like something, or he can't sleep or something. He says he can't sleep, so Ed goes off to like put him to bed. And this is, again, very similar to Fatal Attraction, where I think they have a similar scene at the start where the husband and wife are kind of like necking a little bit, but then like the child interferes. And I feel like I'm not like complaining about it too much, but I feel like it's very simplistic writing, because, and it's interesting because I think, like I've said, like these marriages aren't like passionless and loveless. Like I don't think that it's that Connie and Ed aren't like still having sex and stuff, but I think that they really have to create more of an obstacle to justify the affair, because, you know, if they had just slept together, it would seem even more like, you know, why is Connie doing this, in the same way with Fatal Attraction. So the child is like this really convenient external obstacle to be like, oh, they want to, but it's just not happening. And like, you know, it's sort of creating a bit of a marital bed death situation. Yeah, so that's sort of presented as kind of the reason, anyway, one of the reasons anyway. So it doesn't happen. And then the next day, or like around the same time, Connie is looking, she's still thinking a little bit about Paul. Paul Martell is his full name, by the way. Still thinking about him. She opens the book that he'd given her just to have a look, and his phone number falls out, which is so like unsmooth. And I'm really unsure about whether he deliberately put that in there beforehand to try and like, you know, get her, or whether he just has his phone number in all of his books because he's a bookseller. Like, that's not really very clear, but it's not really relevant. So the next day, Connie is going out doing more of her kind of whatever her daily errands are. I don't know. She's wearing her trench coat again, I think. And she is in Grand Central Station, and she kind of impulsively decides to call Paul. That's hard to say. To call Paul and sort of just thank him for like taking care of her. And he is just like, oh, you know, where are you right now? Why don't you just come by and like have some coffee and stuff? And, you know, she, like, you can tell that she immediately thinks that this is a bad idea, but obviously she does it. And yeah, she comes by. They have like another little chat. He starts showing her some of his books, and they have a moment where I think he's showing her like a book of Braille, and like their hands are like touching and stuff as he's like showing her like how to touch the Braille. But she leaves again at this point, so she's still like resisting just about sort of starting anything. But she comes back another time. Again, she can't resist, you know, she can't help herself. And this time she brings some muffins, but they end up slow dancing, and, you know, she's sort of getting closer and closer to him at this point, and she decides to try and leave. And then she has to come back because she realizes she forgot her coat. And at this point, he just kind of like picks her up and takes her to the bedroom. So it's not even really like a kiss, but like sort of a, you know, like swept away in the passions and sort of like succumbing to the moment. So yeah, we see after this first incident where she goes home, we have like an extended scene of her on the train, and she's sort of like, you know, like she's having all these emotions at once. Like she's crying, she's smiling, she's sort of like reliving the heady excitement of this encounter, but also feeling like incredibly guilty about it. And we start to see, you know, in spite of the fact that she doesn't want to do this, she kind of also can't help herself. She really wants to, so she begins the affair, and we start to see her rejecting some of her husband's advances at kind of both sexual and romantic intimacy, and I kind of like that we see both of that from him. So and, you know, she's also kind of attempting to stay close to him while pushing him away at the same time, like as he's sort of he doesn't become suspicious immediately, but like I think fairly quickly. At one point she comes by and brings him like a sweater that she's bought him, and he's sort of like, oh, I didn't know you were going to be in the city today, and you know, she's feeling guilty about that. So yeah, we have two main instances where her husband is continuing to attempt to connect with her. The first one is when Diane Lane, that's the actress, Connie, when Connie is taking a bath, and her husband, you know, decides to join her, and he starts trying to, you know, initiate kind of more like touching and kissing and wanting her to stay in the bath with him. And she, you know, is like, oh no, it's cold, I'm gonna get out. And, you know, you can see his kind of hurt and sadness, and I think confusion at like the rejection from her. And it's quite, like, they're both really good in this film, but like Richard Gere is just like, oh, like his like, he's so like good at capturing like the subtlety of that feeling of like, you know, like he just not understanding like why she's like pushing him away. And then not too long after this, she's in the bathroom, she's kind of getting ready for the day, and you know, Ed is like, why don't we get lunch together? And you know, she's sort of like washing her face, and like you can see her trying to think of a reason that she can invent to get out of this, and she ultimately says, oh, I can't, I've got like a facial booked at Georgiana's at like 12:30. And you know, again, he's really sad, but he's like, his like reaction is like really, really sweet. He's sort of like, oh, you know, it's a waste of money, you know, as in meaning because she's already so beautiful to him, and like, you know, kind of kisses her, and he's really like sad in like a very gentle way, like he kind of, yeah, like he's kind of accepted it, you know, before he doesn't know this is an affair yet, but he can feel that she's being quite evasive and sort of avoiding him. So we later see him at his office, and he decides to call, I think he's starting to feel suspicious at this point, so he decides to call the facial place and ask if they've got like an appointment under his wife's name, and of course they don't, because she's not going there. She's going off to boink Paul Martell in his apartment. So at this point he knows that she's lying to him, but he doesn't confront her about it, which is interesting. So in the meantime, Connie is starting to become like a bit more reckless with the affair. She agrees to go to, she doesn't really go on many like dates per se with Paul. It's mostly just like them, like, you know, in the apartment, like having sex and kind of, you know, I assume just like lounging around and talking and eating and that kind of thing. But she decides to go to a cafe with him, and you know, the whole time she's like, this is a bad idea, and you know, it's pretty bad idea. Because they are discovered, although she doesn't realize this, but she's you know, kissing and canoodling with him, and they're having like this like little kind of, well, they're having like this argument at first where he's like, you know, you have to let me kiss you if there's like two men over there in the other part of the cafe, and he's like, if that guy is the one who pays the bill, then you have to let me, you know, kiss you and stuff, and he is, so you know, they do. And it turns out that of these two men who are also in the cafe, one of them is one of Ed's co-workers, and he's played by, I don't know the name of the actor, but I can tell you that he is Aria's father in Pretty Little Liars. Yeah, and he sees them together, and, you know, he must have seen Connie at, like, events or work things or something. Like, he knows who Connie is, so, like, he's seen them, and, you know, you can see his, like, shock that Connie is, like, making out with this other guy in, like, the middle of this cafe. But, you know, he doesn't confront her, he doesn't say anything, he just leaves. So that happens, and yeah, Connie's becoming more reckless, so she also, like, she goes on another, I think this is, like, there's a point where Ed is also going to be, like, out of town on, like, a work thing, so, like, she immediately, like, scooters over to see Paul, and, you know, she's just walking up to his flat, and she's, like, almost there when she bumps into two women who she's sort of quite friendly with. They reference auctions a lot throughout this film. Like, I don't know if, I think Connie and Ed are meant to be quite well off. I'm not sure to what degree, and I'm also not sure exactly what Ed does. Like, I think it's probably referenced and I just didn't fully pay attention to it, but I think he makes quite a lot of money. So they go to like auctions and things. I don't know if they do things for charity or if they just go to auctions to actually buy like furniture and stuff themselves. I'm not really sure, but either way, she bumps into these women who, I don't know if she knows them through that or something else. Again, one of these women, I don't know the actress's name, but I can tell you that she plays Blair's mother in Gossip Girl, amongst other things. So, you know, there's a couple of familiar faces to me in this film. But she goes to the cafe with these two women. Like, this cafe is literally round the corner from, like, Paul's apartment. And, you know, she tells them, like, oh, I just need to make a quick phone call. And you kind of immediately reminded that this is a 90s film by the fact that, like, she doesn't have a mobile phone on her. So it's like she's just using the cafe phone, which is quite, I don't know, it's one of those, like, really small things that, like, if you were watching it in the 90s, well, I guess this is 2002, actually, like, you wouldn't really think much of it, but, like, watching it now, I'm just like, oh my gosh, she has to use the cafe phone. But she uses this phone and she calls Paul just to be like, oh, I'm just going to be a bit late because I got distracted by these women who I know, wait for me. And then he decides to come into the cafe himself, which is amusing. But he doesn't, like, come over, he doesn't make it known that he knows her, which I guess is good because it would have put her in an awkward position. But then he wanders into the, like, bathroom and she follows him. She, like, excuses herself to the women and is like, I'm just going to the bathroom. And then she just goes into the bathroom and they just start, like, fucking in the stall. And it's one of those very, like, film fucks where, like, I'm not saying it's completely implausible, but, like, there's, like, literally no foreplay. It's just immediately, like, him just, like, sticking himself in her and just, like, just very quick, down and dirty, kind of, like, 5-minute, thing. And, then she eventually 5-10 minute, however long. And then she eventually comes back out, and the women are like, oh, I hope you're okay. You were gone a long time. She's like, everything's fine. So she's really, like, playing with fire. And the two women also, like, are commenting on the man. They're like, oh, have you seen the really fucking hot guy? And they're, like, gesturing at Paul, who's at the counter. And, the woman who, Blair's mum's character, whose name I forget, it's like, I think they're called, like, Tess and Sally or something, I forget their names, but she's just like, oh, if he just, like, so much as smiled at me, I'd be on my back in seconds. And they start talking about having affairs, and the other woman, who isn't Blair's mum, is like, like, affairs are serious and people can get hurt. And, you can tell that Diane's, like, really kind of silently, like, stewing in, like, the kind of the sort of repercussions of that. And, like, she's becoming increasingly aware of what she's doing. So Ed, meanwhile, has become suspicious enough that he's hired a PI to follow Connie and find out, for good, what's going on. And in the meantime, we're also getting more scenes that I hadn't really, like, fully picked up on it the first time I watched this film, actually. So it was interesting to notice it on the rewatch. But they start to, like, make Connie becomes a worse, like, homemaker. She starts to, like, burn the dinner that she's making, and she's late to pick up Charlie, her son, from school. Like, at one point she's like, she's, like, in the kind of post-coital glow, like, lying on, like, a sofa or something with Paul, and she, like, realizes that she's, like, fallen asleep, and she's like, oh crap, so she has to hurry to the school. And you don't really know exactly how long he's been waiting, but it's, like, clearly long enough. Like, he's sat on this step and there's a woman who must be, like, a teacher or some kind of guardian who's just waiting with him. So, like, she's really kind of falling apart in the sense that she's struggling to suddenly balance, like, this secret life that she's living with kind of her regular domestic life, which, I don't know, I just feel like that's a little bit, I don't know, it feels like quite a sexist notion, I guess. Like, the kind of, I'm not denying that obviously having an affair is wrong, but it's like, as soon as this woman is, like, I don't know, having sex or, like, I don't know, enjoying herself, like, she just suddenly, like, can't handle all her responsibilities. Like, I think that that's a little bit over the top. And, like, it's not even like she might not make one mistake, but I think the fact that you have these two separate scenes is meant to be kind of indicating that she's just really And I don't even think it's entirely presented as like a guilt thing. Like, I don't think it's like, oh, she burnt the dinner because she's like so consumed by her emotions. It just seems like it's like she's sort of, I don't know, it's like she's suddenly become less competent at what she's doing. And I feel like that's just a little bit, you know, like to be like, oh, she's suddenly this neglectful mother who can't like keep track of time. It's like, I don't know. I find that quite hard to buy, I guess, as like as a conceit. Okay, so we're coming to the second half of the film now. So Connie decides to visit Paul spontaneously. I think this might actually be because of the trip, actually, so I might have gotten my order a bit mixed up, because they have the meal where she burns the dinner and then she finds out that Ed is going to be leaving for a trip. And then that's when she kind of impulsively visits Paul. But this isn't like the sort of maybe the day or something. It's not like normally when she normally goes, I think, or something, or she's not giving him any warning. So she's just like driving through the street and she sees Paul with this other woman and she gets super jealous and literally like goes after them into this bookstore. It's always the books with Paul. He's a bookman. She goes after them and she like literally starts wailing on him and it's like, you know, well, were you cheating on me? Kind of, well, not cheating on me, but like, you know, she's like, how could you with this other woman? And he ends up like taking her back to his apartment and is like, you know, she's just a friend, like you're overreacting. And she's like really like, you know, she's so sort of angry, and I think angry at herself for being that angry and consumed by it, that she's like, you know, we need to end this. But they end up going into, I don't think it's even in his apartment. I think they literally like fuck in the corridor initially, which is very risky. And she's initially like saying no. She's initially like, no, we can't. But then, you know, and again, I also appreciate this because as I've talked about in all the Michael Douglas films, like some of the consent in those is like really sketchy or just lacking altogether. So in this one, I like that even though she's initially like, no, we can't do this, you know, he's literally like, do you want, you know, like they're kind of tussling and then he's like, do you want me to fuck you? And she's like, yes. And then I think she's like, he gets her to like actually say it before he starts doing it and stuff. So it's like, you know, we appreciate that Paul Martell like is very much like, I'm going to make sure she actually wants it before I do it. Because like some of the men in these films really do not do that. And sometimes it's presented as being sexy as well, which is, you know, I think outside of an actual negotiated scene or something to kind of make out. I suppose that's meant to be the point of the fantasy of the fiction, but, you know, I think sometimes it just gets very wishy-washy and bad. So I'm glad that he's very much like, do you actually want me to fuck you? You know, do you want me to fuck you? And she's like, yes. And then I think they actually go back into his apartment to, like, continue. And she finally leaves, and this is kind of an interesting point where Ed has finally shown up. His PI has given him all the photos of, like, a recent encounter of Connie and Paul, and they were like leaving a cinema together, and Ed is really like shook up by this. He's like, oh, they're actually doing stuff that isn't, you know, like they're not even just having sex in his apartment, they're actually like going out and doing stuff together. So like he's really like betrayed by like the emotional intimacy of it, which I also appreciated the details of, like, you know, like you can really see how this is affecting him on multiple levels. And yeah, I think that's one of the things I like about this film. Like, there's a lot of elements of the nuance to that, and I think that they do all that quite well. So yeah, he's also found out where Paul lives from the PI guy, obviously, who's told him the address. So like he goes to the apartment and he manages to get into the building and stuff. And this is like just after Connie has left, so like it's really interesting timing. Like we see Connie like leave the apartment and run off back to her, like I think she drives a Land Rover or something, to like drive away, and like it's just as like Ed is at the opposite end of the street. Like Ed's not seen her, but like then he crosses over to like go into the apartment and confront Paul. So this is where the film starts to change tone. So Paul is like really, well, maybe not shocked, but he's like really kind of unsure of what to do with the fact that like Ed has like come round to his apartment and just wants to talk to him about this like affair, and he's like, oh, you know, do you guys like do stuff together? Is she happy? And like, you know, he's asking all these questions, and then, you know, and like Richard Gere's, I think this is like the best, like all this like acting in this film is really good, but like I think Richard Gere's performance of just processing this affair in this particular scene is probably the best one. And like just like the level of like trying to wrap his head around what it all means, and you know, he's telling like the guy, like, you know, we were married, we've been married for like 11 years and we have a son. And, you know, Paul, like, because Paul offers him a drink, so they're both, like, drinking vodka. Because, like, you know, he'd offered him all these drinks, and Ed's like, I want vodka, because obviously he needs something really strong to kind of just help him, like, deal with this really bizarre situation. And then, like, the tipping point comes when Ed sits on the bed, and it's like shown to be all mussed up as well. Like Connie's like literally just been there, and you don't know whether or not he realizes that or not. Maybe he thinks it's possible, but he sees this snow globe, and you know he's trying to wrap his head around like, why is Connie giving you this snow globe? And Paul's just like, oh, I don't know, maybe she just wanted to buy me a present. And, you know, Ed's like, oh, she didn't buy it for you. I gave it to her. So, like, he's really, like, at the sort of emotional heart of this is, like, not even just that Connie's, like, sleeping with this guy, but, like, Connie has given him a gift that her own husband had given to her. Like, you know, either, like, suggesting that she wants to transfer the level of that sentimental value to him, and that's, you know, he feels so betrayed by that. So at this point the film switches into being the thriller part, and when I first watched this I was really taken aback by it because so Ed becomes like, he starts to say like, I'm feeling really unwell, like he feels really overcome by like the nature of what's happened. And he just loses it and strikes Paul over the head twice, I think, with the snow globe. You know, it's just like a moment where he's just snapped, he's just lost it. It's just like a brief kind of fit of passion. And I think, again, that's what makes this film really effective, because I really didn't see that coming at all. Both because I think I just forget the, like, thrill, all these 90s, and I guess this is early 90s, thrillers generally involve some kind of murder or violence, like obviously Fatal Attraction did. But yeah, I think Fatal Attraction just built it up in a much more overt way, because in Fatal Attraction, Alex Forrest, played by Glenn Close, like, she's a very unstable woman. And Michael Douglas also just tends to play the kind of character who you can believe is more capable of becoming angry and violent. Whereas Ed Sumner in this film, like, he's a very mild-mannered man. Like, he wears his glasses and he's got his sweaters. And he's not like weak by any means. Like, he's not kind of some like little, you know, milquetoast pushover or something. Like, he's not this kind of, like, he's just an ordinary man, basically. He's just an ordinary man who really loves his wife and, you know, works hard at his job and loves his son. And yeah, he's just not an angry person. So yeah, to see him just lose it in that moment, like, it feels very dramatic, but I don't think it's unbelievable, because obviously this like level of anguish and pain and anger has just been like building inside of him, and like, you know, he just needed to come out. So yeah, and it's just over very quickly. Like, it's not even like he, you know, it's not even like he really you know, he could have kept striking Paul, but it's just like a couple of like hits of like pure rage, and then he's immediately like overcome by what he's done. He's like, oh, you know, it just happened really quickly and I just lost it. And now he has to deal with the consequences of that as Paul kind of like drops to the ground and is obviously like immediately dead, pretty much. And, you know, we see him, and again, just because he's just this normal guy in this situation that he never could have predicted, it feels really difficult to watch. Like, he's, you know, he's like sweatily trying to wipe his like thumbprints off the glass that he was just drinking vodka out of, and like, you know, he has to like, he wraps the body up in a rug and he has to clean up and he has to get rid of the body, and like, you know, he's suddenly in this like horrific situation. And yeah, we see him do that and clean up, but then he has to go to his son's play. So like, he can't even immediately get rid of the body, and we have like it's very cliche but still very effective, a scene where his boot isn't quite properly closed, and his like one of the other parents is like, oh, I can take a look, and he's just like, you know, don't touch it, just leave it. I also forgot to mention that while Paul is like cleaning up and like panicking, Connie leaves a message on Paul's answering machine that Ed hears. Did I say Paul? I meant Ed, sorry. While Ed is cleaning up the scene, he hears Connie leave a message on the answer phone for Paul where she's like finally decided to end the affair, and she's just kind of saying like, you know, I don't know what to do, this doesn't feel right, but I also just can't keep going, basically. And yeah, so he does that. He heads to the play, tries to kind of act normal, get rid of his bloody clothes. I think he just puts them in like the bin of the like school, which is like insanely risky. Like I would have at least just, I don't know, put them in the boot or something along with the body, but I don't know. And anyway, he then gets up in the middle of the night to get rid of the body. And the police come round not too long after this, and they start questioning. I think at first they just question Connie when she's on her own, and it's like not a very, it's not very intense. It's just like, oh, this guy's gone missing. You know, do you know anything about it? I think they go to her because her number was on the desk pad in his apartment or something. Yeah, and Connie's very evasive, obviously. And then they come back, and this time they start asking more questions, and Ed's there, and the two of them kind of concoct an alibi together. But it isn't really until Connie sees the snow globe. Like I think she figures out that he knows about the affair beforehand because she goes to the dry cleaners with it, and she has his coat, and she finds the envelope of pictures that the PI had taken in the coat. But then they're all at some like having some friends over for dinner, and one of them comments on the snow globe, and it's the snow globe that Connie had given to Paul. So like the fact that it's now back in their house, you know, she looks at Ed and she realizes that, you know, not only does he know about the affair, obviously, which she'd already kind of worked out, but she realizes that he must have been the one that did something. So they have this like heated confrontation scene. And again, this is like, again, a very low bar to set here. But like, because I've watched enough of this kind of film, I appreciate that even though Ed is really angry, he's not, like he tells Connie that he hates her and he wanted to kill her, which like, I think is like not an unreasonable maybe level of, you know, anger at this point in time. But, he doesn't like physically intimidate her in any way. He doesn't hurt her or threaten to hurt her, which I've seen so many films where I think that the kind of violence or the threat of violence against women by either their husbands or their lovers is just like so normalized. And I appreciate that Ed's not like that. He's very, very angry, but he's not going to take that out on her. So yeah, you know, props to them for that. So one thing I also forgot to mention, one thing I almost forgot to mention, I also need to mention about this film, it's got a really gorgeous piano soundtrack. Just very like gentle and emotive, and it really, really fits the tone of this film and like the aesthetic of this film as well. I think there's some really gorgeous, camera editing in it. I think they just manage some of the kind of swells of the emotion and the drama really well without it being very like over the top. Yeah, and I think that the style of this sort of piano soundtrack also is kind of why I think of it as a 90s film, even though it came out in 2002. Like there's just something about the style of it that reminds me a lot of these other, you know, like Indecent Proposal or Fatal Attraction or all these other type of romancy, thrillery type films. And yeah, I'd almost say it's worth watching just for that. Like I do still think it's a good and interesting film, and that they do a lot of things quite well, if you like that kind of film. But yeah, I just think that that's a really nice layer to it. So I also forgot to mention we have a lot of juxtaposition scenes in this film as well, which I don't think are subtle by any means, but I think they're very effective. So we have earlier in the film, like as Ed is becoming, you know, suspicious. Actually, I think it might be just after he's found out about the affair and he's seen all the photos. We have a scene of him and he's sitting in like a meeting room kind of officey type place, surrounded by everyone who's talking about work, and he's just kind of looking and feeling so devastated, and it's kind of contrasted against Connie, who is like at that moment in this like passionate clinch with Paul, and you know, he knows that that's happening and he's thinking about that. So I think that's quite a nice juxtaposition of emotion. We also have a scene after Ed has disposed of the body. He just takes it to like a giant, I don't know what the word is, like well, I guess I think of it as a tip, like a dumping ground, where you just, you know, in America you have the giant piles of waste. I don't know how the hell he actually managed to get in there, because he goes in the middle of the night, but yeah, he just dumps Paul's body amongst all this rubbish as well, which is also really, really sad. And an interesting choice. Like, I think that's probably I think they do eventually find the body when the police start asking. They do start asking more questions when they have found it. I'm not sure why he thought that was the safer option than to maybe dump it in the river or to bury it, but that's what he does. And yeah, this scene of because at one point there's like a giant steamroller like flattening all the trash and just going over Paul's body in this rug and crushing it. It's just so, you know, he's been so dehumanized, like he's just a piece of waste and trash at this point. And you see it contrasted with Ed, who's like having a family meal. I'm not really sure what time of year. I was going to say Thanksgiving, but they don't say it's Thanksgiving. I think it's just like a family meal, and he's cutting like a turkey up. And you know, the kind of visceral kind of image of him carving into this flesh as well is also kind of obviously paralleled against, you know, Paul's body just being this kind of, you know, now it's just almost like this piece of meat that's been discarded, and that's kind of quite a powerful, again, not subtle at all, but I think it just, you know, works quite well to kind of evoke the kind of emotions, and you can see the guilt and the kind of stress in Ed's own state, and what he's processing as he's kind of dealing with this. So yeah, so we have the really heated exchange between Connie and Ed, you know, once he's found out, and he's saying like, you know, you were fucking him over and over again and you lied to me, and you know, he says that he hates her and it was her that he wanted to kill. And I think that, and again, this is very, like I say, because Ed's a very mild-mannered man, like that's not, I know that I said about the violence and the threat of violence, but like this is a very empty, like, you know that Ed, or at least I believe from the film that I've watched, that Ed would never lay a finger on Connie, and he, you know, he doesn't even in this situation where he's still full of rage about everything. So it's very much just a kind of the level of his pain, I guess. But yeah, they are kind of, they try to move forward as a couple, even though all this guilt and fear is consuming them. And we have, again, quite a gentle, sad scene where Ed is playing piano with Charlie, and Connie is just, she's sticking something into like a scrapbook. I don't know if it's like photos or something else, I'm not really sure. And they have this moment where like they hear like a police siren in the distance, and they both look at each other like immediately kind of horrified, like, oh, what if it's coming for us? And then it kind of dies away, and they kind of try and go back to what they were doing. And yeah, we have then Connie putting the photos that the PI had taken of her and Paul into the fire, and to, you know, destroy any evidence. And she's, you know, really distraught, and in her mind, and this is like a really gorgeously done flashback, she remembers like that really windy day where she'd met Paul at the very start, and, you know, she'd hurt her leg. And she kind of envisions like what it would have been, you know, like everything they could have avoided if, like, you know, if she just looked at Paul and they'd had this moment of like very obvious like physical attraction between them, but then she had like turned around and like hailed for a taxi cab, one of the classic amazing yellow American taxis, and just gotten in that and gone home and, you know, just carried on with her life. Because you do actually, I think at the scene at the start of the film, there was actually a taxi behind her. So as well, it doesn't even feel like, you know, like this alternate, I mean, it is an alternate universe imagining, but like I think there was the possibility in that moment that she could have done that. So it's not like she's envisioning something that wasn't possible at the time. But I think at the start, when he invited her up, I think there was like a taxi nearby that she could have, you know, she could have been like, I'm gonna go home. So she envisions that. And this scene, again, it's really gorgeously done. You have the amazing piano music, and you also have like, I mean, Diane Lane looks incredible throughout this whole film, but like she's radiant here, and like she's so windswept, and she has this gorgeous smile on her face, and like just like, yeah, all the hair around her, but she's like, you know, she's choosing to carry on with her life as it kind of, don't want to say as it should have been, but I guess as it could have been if she hadn't made the choice that she made. Yeah, and I like that they included that moment of her being like, you know, because you don't get to see, I guess it wouldn't really be a film worth watching. I mean, I'd still watch it if it was just 2 hours of Diane Lane and Richard Gere just kind of having a normal but happy married life. But, you know, it wouldn't be the story that we're trying to tell here, so. So yeah, the film ends. Connie and Ed have gone to another event. I don't know if it's an auction or like they go to all these weird events. I don't know what they actually are, but there's one point where they're like dancing at an event, and sort of having this like really passionate. I think it's quite interesting. They don't actually kiss. They're kind of dancing, and then they're sort of like not quite, I don't know, pouring at each other, like kissing each other's faces, or I don't know. I don't really know how to describe it without you watching it yourself. But it's sort of like, it's like a kind of passion, but it's a very like desperate kind of, you know, like you can really feel like they're really trapped in this situation that they don't know how to get out of, and they don't know what to do, and they feel like this like sword of Damocles of like, you know, being caught for Paul's murder is hanging over their heads at this point, which it very much is. And yeah, just this like quiet desperation. Again, it's like a really affecting scene. And they're driving back home, and Charlie's like asleep in the back seat, and they're talking about like, you know, starting a new life together. They're like, you know, we could sell the house, we could move to another country, we could start a new life, we could change our names, blah 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 blah. And then they pull up, and we cut to outside of the car, and we see that they've stopped outside the police station. So it seems like they have made the choice that Ed is actually going to turn himself in, which I think he discussed towards the end of the film, and Connie obviously just doesn't want him to do that. But yeah, that's the end of the film. And I also, this is so like hammy and like so hammy and over the top, but when they stop outside the police station, the overhead traffic light is green, and then it changes to like orange and then to red, and it's almost like, you know, this is like the moment that they have to stop. This is like the end of the line for them. This is like, I don't know, it's like you know, everything is coming to a stop. I don't know. They were clearly doing something with the light. I feel like that wasn't a coincidence. And then yeah, the credits come up, and that is the end of the film. So yeah, there were a couple of things I wanted to talk about, just sort of comparing it to Fatal Attraction specifically. I think that there are elements of the film that I think are quite nuanced, I would say, maybe, and perhaps generous with kind of the portrayal of infidelity and perhaps why somebody would choose to be unfaithful. I do think that, generally speaking, there is like a double standard coming up of female infidelity versus male infidelity, which a little bit of that is what I already talked about with the elements of Connie seemingly starting to just fail at being like a wife and a mother, you know, like all her domestic kind of duties and responsibilities. I think that the titles themselves are also maybe not a conscious choice, but I do feel like maybe an element of that. So obviously the title Fatal Attraction, you know, the emphasis is on the attraction. I think that the film itself reflects that as well, you know. I forget the name of the character now because there's so many different characters. Michael Douglas's character in that film, he gets a happy ending of sorts, or at least the status quo is restored. The status quo is restored, and he gets to go back to living with his, you assume, a happy life with his wife and child after he effectively kills, both of them are killed actually, so that might be also, sorry, I'm just picking up my thing. That might be interesting to compare as well. So Alex Forrest's character is killed because she displays this threat to the nuclear family and their stability. But she is actually a very unstable character, whereas Paul Martell isn't, like he's just a regular guy. Like, I suppose the threat in him is more his virility and the sort of youth, and, this exciting kind of sexual escape that he offers to Connie. But I just feel like, and the fact that this film is called Unfaithful, I feel like there is maybe more emphasis made on Connie's infidelity than on the infidelity of Michael Douglas's character. And also, she doesn't get a happy ending, or even like just she doesn't get the status quo restored. Like at the end, Ed is going to turn himself into the police. So she loses both Paul, who has been killed, and her husband. With the kind of implication very much being like, if a woman is unfaithful, she's going to lose everything, and that's the punishment that she deserves. Whereas if a man is unfaithful, like in Fatal Attraction, then, he still gets to go back to his wife and everything's going to be fine. And I appreciate that the director, Adrian Lin, obviously wanted to tell a different story, like even though this is like a gender swapped Fatal Attraction, it's not the same scenario, and he wants to tell a different story, which I understand, but I do think that it's not a coincidence that the woman doesn't get to have the happy ending. And yeah, I don't know, I suppose maybe it would have made for a less, I don't know, actually. I don't think it necessarily would have been a less interesting ending if Connie and Ed had continued their married life, but they'd had to they had to just live with the consequences of what they've done for the rest of their lives. I think that's like just as powerful, like regardless of whether Ed faces any external consequences, external punishment for what he did. I think that well, I don't know. I mean, I suppose it's not that he doesn't deserve to face any consequences for what he's done, but I think it would still be as interesting and as effective to see him and Connie just, maybe even some kind of montage at the end where they're kind of living this sort of normal-ish married life, but like you just have it peppered with these moments of some, whether it's like the police siren or some other reminder of Paul in some way, or what they've done that just continually haunts them. Like, I think that's really interesting, to be honest. So yeah, I just feel like it's just generally frustrating, I suppose, that Fatal Attraction is sort of like he almost gets off scot-free. It's like he got to sleep with this woman and then he killed her, but it's okay because she deserved to die because she was unhinged and unstable and she was threatening them, and I don't know, it's just a very sort of like this kind of classic male fantasy where you get to have your cake and eat it too, as they say, where he gets to have this affair, but then he's justified in punishing the woman he had the affair with, like she was she's the only one who bears the brunt of all the sin of what he did. Whereas Connie doesn't get to have that, like what a kind of, and if I feel like if they'd had a film where, imagine if Connie had had the affair with Paul and then Paul had been turned, it turned out to be some crazy guy and she killed him and just gone back to a happy married life. I don't know, I mean, I suppose that would hit differently anyway, because men are so often portrayed as being violent and threatening, aren't they? So I suppose it's less unexpected than Alex, although her instability is presented as very much being I don't know, I think the crazy woman sort of, you know, needing like commitment and stuff is very sexist in and of itself. And, you know, maybe if Paul had been like that, actually, maybe if he'd been like the crazed one who was like, I need you to be with me, I need you to leave your husband, and she'd had to kill him. Yeah, I don't know whether that would have hit the same as Fatal Attraction, because I suppose the threat of an unstable man threatening a woman feels much more common anyway, so yeah, I don't know. But regardless of the kind of frustrations of that ending in some ways, I think it's a really good film, and it's just, yeah, it's good. I enjoyed it. I would like to check out some of his other films. He's done one called 9.5 Weeks. I think that has Kim Basinger in it or somebody, and that's again kind of like a very passionate affair that escalates in some way. I don't know if there's a murder or not, but I guess I'll find out when I get round to it. But yeah, I feel like I've probably not fully done justice to Unfaithful, but yeah, I'd say it's worth your time. Yeah, that was my ramble anyway. I hope you're all having a nice day, and I will see you again very soon for another video. Bye bye. Bye bye.